In Somalia, an urgent fight against one of the world's biggest terror threats. We're with U.S. forces now training Somali troops in live fire drills and hand-to-hand combat. The target, Al-Shabaab, the al-Qaeda subsidiary responsible for deadly attacks across Africa, including on American civilians. They are well-financed and better armed than the Somali military, according to U.S. military officials here in the region. Brigadier General Peter Bailey helps oversee strategy, plans, and programs for U.S. Africa Command.
What we've seen is not necessarily holding land or territory, more extortion, more closer to an organized crime organization.
What does Somalia need to defeat Al-Shabaab?
Courtney, I think what we're witnessing right now is what Somalia needs. They need a qualified security force which is trained up into the mob. They need democratic reform to make sure the government is recognized as being legitimate. And they also need a desired end state, a shared security goals, and working with allies and partners in order to achieve that shared desired end state.
U.S. troops are not on the front lines here, but do watch from overhead drones. This exclusive video shows Somali forces taking back territory that Al-Shabaab once held. This is the Joint Operations Center. The video was first seen here, where the U.S. military monitors drone feeds of Somali special operators during missions. When trouble arises, the U.S. can provide support with.
Extremist violence in Africa is surging. Last year, more than 20,000 people were killed in the region, which extends more than 3,500 miles from east to west on the continent. Our Deborah Pata joined military exercises with NATO allies and African soldiers for a closer look at how they're training to counter the threat.
U.S. Special Forces and their NATO allies training alongside African soldiers in counter-terrorism drills. It's called Flintlock. Special ops exercises like rescuing hostages from a simulated airport attack, a very real scenario in the Sahel.
1-2 Zulu, hostage ready to move. Time now.
Home to the world's fastest growing terror groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Ghana is one of few countries in the region that has dodged the rapid rise of violent extremism, and General Frank Tay of the Ghanaian Armed Forces said they've done this by blocking any potential incursion before it reaches their borders.
Once you allow terrorist activities in a particular country to fester, then that can spread across the globe.
This is exactly what the U.S. fears. AFRICOM Deputy Commander Lieutenant General John Brennan says Flintlock is not only about military training.
We offer things that are meaningful in the long term, sharing democratic values, instilling the rule of law.
The debate is now raging over what to do, how to respond to the threat of ISIS, saying nothing of those other hotspots in the rest of the world, and the news overnight that U.S. forces carried out a military operation on yet another terrorist battleground. That part of the story tonight from NBC's Andrea Mitchell.
Terrorists attacking this shopping mall in Nairobi last September, killing 67 people. A Somali-based al-Qaeda affiliate called Al-Shabaab. Monday, American Hellfire missiles targeted their leader, Ahmed Godane, near Mogadishu. U.S. intelligence can't say yet whether they got him. But tonight, jihadi social media sites say he was injured, not killed. Beyond Somalia, Islamic extremists are posing a growing threat across a broad front. ISIS militants in Iraq and Syria gaining ground. Rebels in Libya 2 years after Benghazi, overrunning an embassy residence in Tripoli. Boko Haram militants kidnapping hundreds of girls in Nigeria. But a cautious President Obama asking advisors, if he takes military action, what happens the day after?
The president's got a real dilemma. It's hard to imagine he's going to solve this complex problem with U.S. military.
Puntland's success in combating a growing Islamic State group presence in the northeastern region is particularly notable given the relative lack of success of the central Somali government's confrontation with the al-Qaeda-affiliated group Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, more commonly known as al-Shabaab, which for about 2 decades has waged war against federal forces. Islamist groups have been part of Somalia's fractured political landscape since the country's descent into civil war in the 1980s.
Islamic State is expanding its operation in northern Somalia, despite efforts from Somali forces to tackle the rising threat. The fighting is being mostly carried out by forces in the semi-autonomous Puntland region, and it has been substantial as soldiers in this remote area have faced obstacles including harsh terrain, ambush attempts, and hidden explosive devices.
For more than 3 decades, Somalia has remained a central concern in U.S. security planning in Africa, not because of ideology alone but because of geography, maritime routes, terrorism spillover, and the long-term risk of state collapse creating global consequences. When the United States confirmed the expansion of military operations in Somalia following new terror threat assessments, the decision reflected not a sudden shift, but the culmination of years of intelligence warnings, regional instability, and evolving militant capabilities. Somalia sits along one of the most strategic coastlines in the world, bordering the Gulf of Aden and overlooking shipping lanes that connect Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Nearly a third of global maritime trade passes near Somali waters. Any sustained instability in the country has implications far beyond the Horn of Africa, affecting energy flows, commercial shipping insurance rates, and the security calculations of global powers. This strategic reality has shaped Washington's approach to Somalia since the early 1990s, even as tactics and visibility have changed over time. The latest expansion of U.S. military activity comes amid renewed warnings from American and allied intelligence agencies that militant groups operating in Somalia, particularly Al-Shabaab, have increased both operational tempo and external ambition. While the group has long focused on overthrowing Somalia's federal government, recent intelligence assessments indicate growing interest in regional and international targets, including Western interests in East Africa and beyond. These assessments were central to Washington's decision to intensify our operations, intelligence support, and coordination with Somali security forces. Al-Shabaab remains one of the most resilient extremist organizations in the world. Despite sustained military pressure from Somali forces, African Union peacekeepers, and U.S. airstrikes, the group continues to control rural territory, generate revenue through taxation and extortion, and carry out complex attacks in urban centers. Its ability to survive leadership losses and adapt tactically has made it a persistent threat not only to Somalia but to neighboring countries such as Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, all of which host U.S. military assets or cooperate closely with Washington on security matters. The United States military presence in Somalia has evolved significantly over the past decade. Rather than large-scale troop deployments, Washington has relied on a lighter footprint emphasizing special operations forces, intelligence assets, and precision airstrikes. This approach reflects lessons learned from earlier interventions, particularly the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, which deeply influenced U.S. public opinion and policy regarding direct involvement in Somalia. Since then, American strategy has focused on enabling local partners while minimizing U.S. casualties and political exposure. The current expansion does not signal a return to conventional ground warfare but rather an intensification of existing tools. U.S. Africa Command has increased the tempo of airstrikes targeting militant leadership, weapons caches, and training facilities. Surveillance and reconnaissance flights have been expanded to monitor militant movement across southern and central Somalia. Intelligence sharing with Somali forces has been upgraded, allowing for more coordinated operations against high-value targets. These measures are designed to degrade militant capabilities before they translate into attacks with regional or global impact. Somalia's federal government has welcomed the expanded U.S. role, viewing it as essential to maintaining pressure on militant groups at a time when domestic forces remain overstretched. Despite years of international assistance, Somalia's security institutions continue to face challenges including limited resources, political fragmentation, clan dynamics, and uneven command structures. While progress has been made in building elite units capable of conducting counterterrorism operations, nationwide security coverage remains uneven, particularly in rural areas where militants exploit weak state presence. The timing of the U.S. decision also reflects broader geopolitical calculations. As global attention has shifted toward conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, Washington has sought to prevent security vacuums from emerging in other regions. U.S. officials have repeatedly emphasized that extremist groups thrive when international focus wanes. Somalia, with its history of ungoverned spaces and transnational militant networks, represents a scenario where reduced engagement could quickly produce consequences felt far beyond Africa. In recent months, attacks attributed to al-Shabaab have demonstrated increasing sophistication. Complex assaults on government buildings, targeted assassinations of officials, and coordinated bombings in Mogadishu have underscored the group's continued operational capacity. In some cases, militants have targeted locations associated with international partners, signaling an intent to challenge foreign involvement directly. These developments reinforce concerns within Washington that a failure to respond decisively could embolden the group and undermine years of counterterrorism gains. The expansion of U.S. operations also carries implications for regional security dynamics. Neighboring countries, particularly Kenya, have long been targets of cross-border attacks linked to Somalia-based militants. Kenya hosts significant U.S. military infrastructure and plays a central role in regional counterterrorism efforts. Increased U.S. activity in Somalia is therefore seen as part of a broader strategy to stabilize East Africa and protect allied interests across the region. Critics of expanded military involvement argue that airstrikes alone cannot resolve Somalia's underlying instability. They point to decades of conflict driven by political fragmentation, economic deprivation, and weak governance. Without parallel investments in political reconciliation, economic development, and institutional reform, they argue, military pressure risks becoming an endless cycle. U.S. officials acknowledge these challenges but maintain that security is a prerequisite for any sustainable progress, and that unchecked militant expansion would undermine all other efforts. Civilian protection remains a central concern in U.S. operations. American military officials emphasize strict targeting protocols and intelligence vetting designed to minimize civilian harm. Nonetheless, airstrikes in populated areas carry inherent risks, and allegations of civilian casualties have periodically sparked criticism from human rights organizations. These concerns highlight the delicate balance Washington seeks to maintain between effective counterterrorism and adherence to international norms. The Somali conflict also intersects with global counterterrorism priorities. Al-Shabaab maintains ideological and operational ties to transnational extremist networks, positioning Somalia as a potential hub for external plotting if pressure is reduced. U.S. intelligence agencies have warned that allowing such groups to regroup could create threats not only to regional allies but to the U.S. homeland itself. This assessment has consistently shaped bipartisan support for continued engagement in Somalia across multiple U.S. administrations. The expanded military operations further signal Washington's intent to remain a key security actor in Africa despite growing competition from other global powers. While U.S. involvement in Somalia is driven primarily by counterterrorism, it also reflects a broader effort to maintain influence in strategically important regions. In recent years, Russia, China, and other actors have increased their diplomatic, economic, and security footprints across Africa. Continued U.S. engagement in Somalia reinforces Washington's role as a security partner in the Horn of Africa. Somalia's internal political dynamics add another layer of complexity. The federal system remains fragile, with tensions between the central government and regional administrations affecting security coordination. Militant groups have exploited these divisions, presenting themselves as alternatives to state authority in some areas. U.S. support aims not only to weaken militants militarily but also to bolster the Somali government's credibility by enabling it to assert control and provide basic security. The decision to expand operations also follows lessons learned from previous drawdowns. When U.S. forces reduced their presence in Somalia in the past, militant groups quickly sought to exploit perceived gaps. Intelligence assessments suggest that maintaining consistent pressure is critical to preventing regrouping and expansion. The current escalation reflects a determination to avoid repeating cycles of disengagement followed by crisis-driven re-entry. From Washington's perspective, Somalia represents a test case for modern counterterrorism strategy, limited footprint, partner-led operations, and sustained intelligence-driven pressure. The success or failure of this approach will shape how the United States engages with similar threats elsewhere. Officials argue that allowing Somalia to become a safe haven again would not only endanger the region, but undermine global counterterrorism norms developed over 2 decades. For Somali civilians, the implications are mixed. While many welcome efforts to curb militant violence, prolonged conflict has taken a heavy toll on daily life. Displacement, economic disruption, and insecurity remain widespread. The challenge for both Somali authorities and their international partners is to ensure that military gains translate into tangible improvements in governance and livelihoods, rather than temporary security bubbles. The expansion of U.S. military operations also places renewed scrutiny on the long-term endgame. Washington has repeatedly stated that its goal is not permanent military presence but the creation of conditions under which Somali forces can manage security independently. Achieving this objective requires not only military training but political stability, financial sustainability, and public trust in state institutions. Progress in these areas has been uneven, raising questions about timelines and expectations. International partners continue to play a critical role. The African Union's transition mission, regional allies, and European partners all contribute to Somalia's security landscape. The U.S. escalation is coordinated within this broader framework, reflecting a recognition that no single actor can address Somalia's challenges alone. Multilateral cooperation remains essential to preventing duplication of effort and managing regional spillover risks. As operations expand, the risk of escalation with militant groups also increases. Al-Shabaab has historically responded to intensified pressure with retaliatory attacks, both within Somalia and across borders. U.S. and Somali officials have acknowledged this risk while emphasizing preparedness and resilience. Preventing militants from achieving symbolic victories remains a key objective, as such events can amplify recruitment and propaganda. The renewed focus on Somalia comes at a time when global security resources are stretched. Balancing commitments across multiple regions requires careful prioritization. For Washington, Somalia's importance lies not only in immediate threats but in the long-term costs of neglect. Allowing instability to fester in strategically vital regions has historically proven more expensive than sustained engagement. Ultimately, the expansion of U.S. military operations in Somalia reflects a calculation shaped by history, intelligence, and geography. It underscores the enduring relevance of the Horn of Africa in global security planning and the persistent challenge posed by resilient extremist networks. Whether this intensified effort will lead to lasting stability depends on factors that extend far beyond military action alone. The coming months will test the effectiveness of this renewed strategy. Success will be measured not only in disrupted plots and degraded networks but in the ability of Somali institutions to consolidate gains and extend governance. Failure would risk reinforcing cycles of intervention and instability that have defined Somalia's modern history. For the United States, the stakes involve not just Somalia as future but the credibility of its counterterrorism approach in an increasingly complex global landscape. As Washington expands its operations, the message is clear. Somalia remains a frontline state in the fight against transnational terrorism, and the United States is not prepared to allow emerging threats to go unanswered. The challenge ahead lies in ensuring that military escalation serves as a bridge to sustainable peace rather than another chapter in an open-ended conflict whose consequences reach far beyond Africa's shores.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.